Welcome and thank you for joining. This is Amplified Wealth's According to Plan. I am your co-host, Kate Fishbein. I am joined by my co-host, Tom Farrell. And we are excited to have a guest with us today, Monica Jalife. She is a friend and a colleague. She holds both the CFA and the CFP designations. Welcome, Monica.
Thank you, Kate. Hi, Tom. How are you guys?
Hi, Monica.
Happy Friday.
Yeah.
Happy Friday. Yes. It's always exciting, almost the start of a weekend. And I think, it's like you start thinking about the plans for the weekend and whatnot. And, I always have dreams of kind of headed to a lake to sit lakeside with a glass of wine. But that's just kind of the second home fantasy that we're here to talk about today.
I'm actually in a vacation mindset. And this is a perfect topic for us to tackle today because tomorrow I'm on vacation.
Oh, happy vacation.
Yeah. So looking forward to, we're hitting the Cape up in Massachusetts. It's been a little while since we were up there. So the kids, they probably won't remember all the things that we did. I think we were there in about 2018 or so. So enough time has passed where it's going to feel like a new trip, hopefully. But yeah, I'm thinking about, the places that the Cape has to offer. We found a great Airbnb in one of those towns that's kind of pretty close to everything. And as I was thinking about what we were talking about today, just the timing of it, the fact that, it's August now and summertime, people are going away. We always kind of look at different places in terms of vacation with a little kind of like eye towards, retirement down the road. Where do we want to end up? What's important to us and things like that. So we can certainly chat about that today.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And a lot of what we do with clients is, exploring goals and kind of that, how to prioritize goals and where does that fit in. And this is one that comes up often, is owning a second home. So I think it's a great topic.
Yeah, and it's a topic that, it sounds always very exciting, but, that's why we're here, because you have to really sit down and make sure you're clear on what is going to be the use of the property, how's your cash flow going to look, are you going to rent it, are you going to just use it, are you going to do a little bit of both? Can you afford it? Obviously, very, very important. And just like anything else, when you do anything that will impact your cash flow, impact your investment for the future, and so on, you have to make sure that it's in the context of your overall financial plan, right? Because if you haven't funded, for example, your kids' education, or there are other perhaps more immediate or more important goals within your overall plan, you have to make sure you're balancing everything out.
There's a lot to think about, really.
Yeah, we'll get in the nitty gritty, but yes.
And I think there's a lot of,
go ahead, Kate, yeah.
I think there's a lot of soul searching involved as well, right? Just as you were saying, Monica, what is the intention with this property? Is it going to be pure personal use, right? Where you're renting the house, 14 days or less per year? Do you have kind of more of a mixed use intention where maybe it's a hybrid model where I'm going to, spend some time there, but also rent it? Or is it purely, more of a rental property where it becomes more of an investment, where you're not staying in the house more than 15 days a year or 10% of the days that it's been rented? So really doing some soul searching about, what is the original intention of the property? And then, I think let's drill down into more of kind of those functional questions too, that a lot of folks need to think about.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, we did get a second home, and, the feeling that you get when you do it is like, wow, it's great. I have a second home. But then when you start to really think about like all these other things, right? And, we have in the slides, like some of the things that perhaps, if you don't think at the first try, but you have to consider, right? Because if you decide that the goal is for you to use it, but you want to defray some of the costs, you want to make sure it's in a location that it's, it's attractive for that type of market, and you could do it, because I could say I want to rent it, but if it's like in the middle of nowhere, I might not be able to. So you have to think about these things. You also have to think about, like, if things break, or if I'm renting it, I have someone in there, can I get to it? Can I do it? Will I want to do those things? Will I want to deal with the quote unquote headache of trying that versus using a company that will help me, will cut into my profits or into the income that I receive? But really, that's why, one of the things that I believe it's the most important is to really sit down with, yourself, your family, whoever you're doing this with, and understand what is going to be your use, like Kate said. How far, are we looking to use it more frequently? How far are we willing to go if we want to really use it more frequently? Because you say, oh, well, it's 3-4 hours, I can do it one time, but will you be able to do it maybe every weekend or things like that?
And that's a great point, because I don't know about your families, but I feel like everyone starts getting cranky after 2 hours in the car. Right? So it's almost like you have to draw a radius, like a radius. Okay, this is how much my family can tolerate being in the car, or this is, within this radius. Okay, we'll probably go there, a couple times a month. Within this radius, maybe once a month. So kind of think of it like that, right? Just how much, what is realistic?
That's a great point. But, I also say things tend to get very quiet in the car now. I just got a text from my wife about where is the blue iPad? They're loading things up, right? Before they hit the road tomorrow morning.
Gotta have a full charge.
Yeah. And everybody's got headphones now, and everybody's got a screen. It's kind of funny. But you're right about the radius. Certainly if you're going to be, I think that plays a big role in terms of, if you're planning on using this property for yourself, right? I think that's like the classic example of a second home, right? We've identified a location that our family loves. We want to use it as much as we can. And therefore, it's typically something that's probably not that far away. And that's a big decision just in terms of location, because I think there's a sense of, I've heard from clients that there's also a sense of obligation to go to that property, right? To factor it into your travel plans for the year. And if it's really far away, if it involves, let's say, a plane ride, number one, the cost can really start to add up. But I think number two, it's, you start to think about, okay, how often will we actually get to use this property? And the other thing I think about is just the fact that, so I have 2 kids. We all have kids on this podcast, and their schedules are so busy today, right? Busier than they've ever been. That it's kind of hard to get away, right? Every weekend you're typically at some sporting event for multiple hours. So I do have I'll tell a little story a little bit later about that obligation piece of it, and kind of how it plays a role in this whole second home mindset.
Yeah. And that's a great point too, right? Because I think going back to that soul searching thought, right? Sometimes folks want to go to the same spot every year, right? Or once a month. But a lot of times, many individuals have wanderlust and want to see different locations. So really being truthful with yourself, am I going to feel that commitment going to this location, whether I want to or not, for care purposes or for vacation or for, vacation purposes, or would I rather see different spots, explore a little, get around? So I think that goes back to some of those soul searching questions that one really needs to do.
And I will mention something that Tom brought up earlier, which is we go on vacations and we do this, but we also have kind of like an eye on perhaps retirement locations, right? And same thing happens when you're buying a second home. Like, is it just because now it's very close to you, but that doesn't factor into your retirement plans? Or this is a place where you could see yourself saying, hey, even if I upgrade later down the road or sell my other property, and this is like now my retirement home, you also can use this as a testing ground, right? To say, would I really live here? And Kate, you say, like, do we have hospitals like nearby, or is this a place where I could see myself retiring, right? Is this a place where I could I live? And is this the place? And that might not be it, but it might be that you took the time to explore that location and you then decide, okay, this is it or not. But it's important to also consider And especially, with the work from home, now people, if you are going to spend some time out there because you can, you just have to make sure you have enough or the infrastructure that is appropriate for you or for your needs.
Definitely. And just to bring up too, I think part of what we're doing here today is just, making sure that, individuals consider risks that maybe they hadn't considered before. And even with this work from home, yes, a lot of companies have gone to hybrid, but it is possible that, you change jobs and or that situation at work could change. So just always, making sure to be considering, the risks involved as well. Like while you might be able to work remotely now, that could potentially change in the future.
Absolutely.
The point about the will family visit, right? Will the kids stop coming? I think that's really interesting because if you think about your kids at different stages of life, right? The younger kids, we're the ones bringing them to a second home for vacation, things like that, right? And then you fast forward, they're in college. Let's say they graduate, they got their first job, and you don't know exactly where they're going to be working and stuff like that. But one of the things that I've heard talk to friends and colleagues and clients about is also kind of thinking about this property as like the magnet that would attract your kids to come, right? So for example, if Meg and I stayed in our suburban house right through retirement, would our kids, once they graduate school, would they want to come visit us, right? And
sure.
And stay and like bring their kids and whatnot? As opposed to if we had the place at the beach or if we had the place at the lake or the ski mountain, right? And I think people are thinking about that in terms of, how do we have a place that we think would be a magnet for our let's say our adult kids to want to come visit, right? And I think that's an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah, and it's almost like a memory maker, right? I think a lot of times people justify it like, oh, we're going to make the best family memories here. And, these are the moments that our kids and our grandkids are going to remember. And honestly, there could be truth to that for sure. But as we all know, and as we're all experiencing, and I'm sure many of our listeners, life gets busy and, reality sets in. So, how realistic is that? Or, could that be recreated in another, situation, like a family vacation or something to that effect?
And then maybe just even to switch onto the next slide, but even then, if those situations change, like, will you still want and be able to continue paying for that? Can you sell it at that point in time if it no longer fits your goals? So you just, you have to think like all the good things, but you also have to think, well, what happens if this? Or what happens if I don't want it anymore? Is this a good market or is it very cyclical or what's happening? But you just have to kind of sit down and kind of write pros, cons, and everything that you can consider to make a very informed decision. It's a very important one, and it's going to impact cash flow, savings, so on. So you have to pay attention to all these things.
Definitely, and just by the nature, second homes can tend to be a little bit more cyclical. And if you're having a financially difficult time, it's very possible that others are having a financially difficult time and that it might be more difficult to sell a second home in that market and or to get the rentals. So just, considering those risks, I think that's a great point, Monica. And then, of course, just watching, how much, are you putting into property and kind of your overall allocation blend as well? What percentage would be in real estate and just making sure that you're on track to meet those other goals. As well as, you want to think about, after this purchase, will you have enough left to be on track? So for sure. And then there's all the extra expenses.
That's where I was going because, if you say, okay, well, the mortgage is this, HOA fees, well, depending on your market, right? But HOA fees, like for these like areas could be pretty high as well. So you have like the ones that are very kind of clear, right? This is this. But then I assure you, there's going to be more than that. Things break, insurance, depending on also the location, could be like astronomical. Like things will happen. You need to keep the place. Like if you're looking to rent it, you need to keep it like, looking nice and up to date. Those things cost too. There's a lot.
Definitely. I like to say expect the unexpected, right? And that's all those little items, the driveway. And a lot of times it's like the stuff you don't want to spend the money on, right? It's like the not fun stuff. It's the driveway, the roof, like all these little items that you're like, oh, it's nothing like,
Refrigerator,
right, the water
air
heater.
brakes. So things always happen, especially if you're, I mean, obviously it's different, right? If you're buying a newer property, you might have less of these headaches, but older properties,
Although I've heard stories, honestly, even the
I
newer
actually
homes
have.
aren't without problems. Yes.
Yeah. But those things, we don't like in the excitement of, oh my God, I'm gonna be close to the beach. You don't think
Yeah.
about those things, or not that you don't think so, but they're like take a kind of like a back space in
Yes.
your mind. So
And then there's the aesthetics. So it's like that kitchen that when you first buy, you're like, oh, it's charming. I can live with it. No. And then you get in and you're like, it's not my style, And then you know where that's headed. That's headed for a big renovation, a big ticket item that, something that might not be your style. Ultimately, you might want to make the property your own, which could lead to additional expenses down the road. For
Well, the
sure.
yeah,
I think the rental aspect of this that we're chatting about too is, to your point, Kate, about the aesthetics of, let's say, the kitchen or whatever that you're talking about.
Sure.
In this world that we live in, that is all about reviews, right? I don't know about you, but whenever I look at properties on Airbnb or VRBO and whatnot, obviously you take a look at all the pictures, location, pricing, all that stuff, and then you look at all the reviews, right? And people will rip you apart if your kitchen, right, doesn't have this kind of quartz countertop, or a fridge that is stainless steel, or something like that, and that can add to, I think, a little anxiety as as an owner of one of these homes that is into the renting out mindset and wants to make that a part of their
Yeah.
second home goals. Is some of those costs can start to add up when you're trying to keep up with the Joneses, if you will.
Exactly. And it's whether or not you're renting or going there for pleasure. You
Yeah.
want to go to a place that you're enjoying for sure. And
yeah.
then
And
there's
I
like two of
want
every.
to. Sorry, Kate. Go
No,
ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, and then there's like two of everything, right? Like things you don't think about, like the linens, the housewares, right? All those things
Mhm.
all those little kind of one ticket items too.
Or more, and then more because you can't just have one because then you need more. Like you need like more than for sure more than one. But I wanted to mention and also a very important point, and this just also stays within the rental. So this might not be as
Mhm.
applicable if it's just your vacation home where you're like, I don't want to rent it, I don't want to do it. It's just my home. So this applies more in the rental if you do want to have people renting it. One, you all, of course, before you take the dive, you have to understand the legal or the county regulations, right, around in the area that you are renting, because you might say, well, I'm going to put an Airbnb for the weekend, but the county doesn't allow for short-term rentals that are less than 30 days. So that becomes harder because maybe you're going to get less of a crowd, right? Maybe more retired people
Yeah.
or different people that can fully work from home and so on. But one very important point, and I say it's like very, very important, is you also have to consider that you need a little bit more insurance, right? You need to be covered because things will happen. What happens if they fall in your house, or what happens, something. I have like a horror story almost, where I had tenants in a house we were renting, older house, but long story short, they created an issue that cost us a fortune to fix. And then they were threatening a legal action against us because it was their fault. And it was totally not our fault. But you don't want to go through the headaches of going through like attorneys and this and that. And you definitely, your insurance will be more expensive because you need like a rental dwelling type insurance where there's higher liability coverages, where you will have a little bit of increased protections, an umbrella policy. Like there are certain things that you have to consider if you're thinking, I'm fully on the rental, that also maybe when you're like so excited about how beautiful this place is and how close to the beach, you're not thinking about. But these also are, to your point, Kate, higher ticket or more expensive. And you need that protection because you don't know what could happen.
Right. And then you have to have the time, right? You had to deal with that headache and then the time to deal with it. It's really challenging. So just, the logistics of kind of going through that nightmare, that's hard on many different fronts, emotionally, financially, and then physically, because, you've got to face it. And that's a great point too on insurance, right? And depending where you are, maybe there are, hurricanes, maybe there are, floods. So making sure that you have that proper insurance coverage. And remember, the insurance markets right now, certain states are very high and have experienced, very high increases. So like, I think Florida is something like 4 times the national average. I'm not sure the exact stat there, but I know it's very high. So making sure that you're taking into consideration all of those, you're laughing.
Florida.
You're like laughing and crying at the same time.
Exactly, laughing and crying because you know what, like our insurance in our vacation home went up. I think they've been up 100%.
Oh my gosh.
Year. So for consecutive year. And we pay more for a small condo because it's close to the beach than we pay for our house, like for our primary home. Like we pay like almost double. So the real considerations.
Right.
And I would just say, look, we want to kind of point out, like, it's not all negative. Like these are just things that
we're painting the nightmare version of this scenario right now.
Yeah.
Not to be dream crushers, which kind of, and just to point out too, a lot of times you think, well, I'm going to buy a condo, right? So I'm just going to have none of these like maintenance headaches and someone will be there and I'll just, but then obviously you have to pay the HOA fees, which could be high. But then you have other considerations, as you were saying with the short-term rentals, what are the bylaws? Can you even rent it out? So some of those considerations. And then I don't know about the two of you, but I love my 2 furry friends. And every time we go away for a week, it's like, oh, I wish they were here. Well, if you're going to have a vacation house, it might be nice to have your pets, right? Your 4-legged friends. And does the condo and or where you're going, does it allow pets? And is it easy for your pets to get there? If you're going on a plane, do you have to, is the dog going to be suffering every time? And then kind of, that's going to be the thought in your head when you're thinking about going, oh, the dog's going to be unhappy, so does it work for your friends, your furry friends too?
Yeah. And care for them if you can't bring them with you is not cheap. Certainly. And, that adds to the planning element too, in terms of logistical considerations and, is there care available for when you want to be away and how frequently do you want to be away? That's a good point. Monica, I had a question for you in terms of the aspect of, we were talking earlier about, folks that do like to kind of wander around the US or the world in terms of their travel aspirations, right? I know you love to do that. So how did you guys think that through in terms of buying a place and then balancing, your love for traveling around the world?
So, when we were having these conversations, the first thing that we talked about is, what is this, right? Is this just for us? Is this just a vacation home that we can use whenever we want and not have to deal with the renting? Or are we going to try to rent it to help with the mortgages and all the costs that we have talked about? And we decided from the beginning that, yes, we want to use it, but we also want to help with the cost because we're not at retirement times or we can't go like for longer periods of time. So we'll just rent it to help with that. So we knew going in that that's what we were going to do. And where we bought the regulation or the county doesn't allow you for less than 30 days, right? So we said, look, if we can rent it for 3 to 6 months of a year, that's what we want. And then we love going there and we love, going there. But it's usually, Tom, to answer your question, it's usually like, we'll go for a weekend, we'll go for like a long weekend, or I don't think we've ever been there more than a week.
Okay. Right.
And that might have been COVID, for example. So I don't think it didn't impact us from the sense that we're not going to travel because this is a place that's less than 2 hours away. We can just go for the weekend, but we still, absolutely love going to new places and doing that. So it didn't interfere with that. And I think the one thing where if we would have decided to say, no, we're going to carry the whole cost of the HOA, the mortgage and everything without having to rent it, it might have in a sense because when you add this all up and you just have it in an annual number, that's a real number that you could be staying in Airbnbs or that's a real number where that, it's a vacation or 1 or 2 or some,
At least. And also, Florida has, I feel like, almost maybe a longer rental period, obviously with the exception of like the really warm months. Because one thing you've got to consider too, right, is if you are considering buying a rental house, is your prime rental season when you want to be there, right? So like up in this, if you're buying a beach house at the Jersey Shore, there's a very marked season. And are those the weekends that you're going to want to be there? Probably. And
Yeah,
so
that's
maybe
right.
it's not as realistic of a rental, or a mixed use rental because you're going to want to be there. So really keeping that in mind too, and then it's laying dormant for, months out of the year and yet still costing you big.
Yeah, I think the mindset out there of the I don't want to call it convenience of renting, but in today's day and age, I think the ability to rent out a property is easier than it used to be, right? So I think that's certainly in the mind of folks that are thinking about second homes, right? Saying, okay, the tools are there for us to be able to rent it out if we want to hire a management company to help us do that, or if we think we're savvy enough to plug into whichever rental sites make sense and whatnot. So I think that is part of the mindset of folks that are thinking about, can I afford this, right? That previous slide was about
Definitely.
affordability. And to Monica's point is, are we gonna pay for this all ourselves? We're not gonna rent it out whatsoever. Obviously, a lot of folks do it that way, and you got to really crunch the numbers. I think you need to really think about and be conservative about it, right? All the points that we were making about things that can pop up, and just being realistic about what that looks like if you're not going to rent it out.
And I think because it's gotten so easy, there have obviously been an increased number of short-term rentals on the market. Therefore, your competition's bigger. So then do you have to renovate the kitchen? You got to make those pictures look good.
Absolutely.
You got to get those renters. So
that's right.
And that's a game changer. I mean, I'll tell you, like, for example, in Florida around Disney, I have the stat, I don't have it handy, but there's like something like 3,000 like Airbnbs available in this radius that is small because, of course, there's Disney. But that if your kitchen is like a little dated and the other one is like super modern, that impacts greatly. And I think that also goes to, like, this is more on the renting side, but you also have to think about, okay, like if I'm spending $100 on this, like how am I accounting for this? And does my accountant know, and will he be able to just get everything he needs? Because that also adds a little bit of a complexity to your tax return, right? What can I deduct? How am I accounting? How am I tracking for this? Am I putting it in my personal American Express, or do I have a separate card just to keep everything separate? Like, can I deduct my mortgage interest? Like all of those things is also advisable to have a conversation with your accountant and all your advisors, right? How does it fit within my financial plan? Talk to your accountant. How am I going to deal with this? What do you recommend for this? But these are the things that you will have to, from my perspective, I would say before you pull the trigger, you would have the conversation with your advisor. You would have the conversation with your accountant and any other team of experts that you are surrounded with. It's worth having that conversation before pulling the trigger because there might be things from their perspective that you're not even considering, right? So always check in with your team of trusted advisors.
That's a great point, especially because, just think about, one, how are you going to fund the house? So even before you purchase, how are you going to fund the account? If you're thinking you're going to take funds from a brokerage account, okay, well, do you have low cost stock? Will there be, potential realized capital gains from liquidating investments to purchase the home? Because that could equal, tax. And then, do you have enough left over to support the funds? So more money's coming out, not just the purchase, but then the potential tax bill. Or are you taking IRA funds where if you're taking money out of an IRA account, you're paying, ordinary income tax on that distribution. Or are you taking from a Roth IRA and taking funds out of this, little darling of an account where you're losing the ability to grow the funds tax deferred over a long period of time. So, all of these could have potential implications for the longer term plan, as well as potential tax implications that need to be considered. And to your point, it's like bringing in all those different advisors, I think is excellent advice.
Yeah, I think that's where the structure of, if you're going to be treating this property as a rental property on a pretty regular basis. That's where talking to your advisors about creating an LLC, to own that property so that you have a separate legal entity that you're flowing your cash flow through, right? All your income, all your expenses. Monica, to your point about bank accounts, right? That you would want to have separate from your personal bank accounts, and it helps you keep track of everything that is associated with that particular property, right? Separate from all the other things that you're doing. But that makes it great in terms of getting your taxes ready on an annual basis. It also helps you keep track of how profitable or maybe unprofitable this exercise may be, depending on what kind of location you're in and the rental market. But it also adds some creditor protection too. So it could be a really smart way to treat a second home that you're really using as a rental property.
Right, because you got to consider all the risks, right? And one of them could be liability for sure. And that could be a risk to your long-term plan. That's a great point.
And that could be a really big one. That's when
things happen
before,
all the time.
And to Tom, I mean, the suggestion on the LLC, I mean, I think, so a lot of people do it just under their own tax return because they have one. But I would say that the minute that you're even considering like even a second one, and even with the first one, because that, creating a separate entity does help with those liability and it helps kind of encapsulate, right, those risks within the entity.
But that's not cheap, right? So it's another cost. So there we go. Right. And then there are different taxation considerations, of course, based on the usage of the property. But also, when you go to sell the property, you're not you're not allowed that Section 121 for a primary residence, where you get that benefit of being able to take a certain amount of tax-free capital gains for the primary residence. So that's not afforded to the second home. So if you did sell the home, what would the potential capital gains be there? That's another
speaks,
thing to think about.
And then it also speaks to, like, how long do you think this is going to last for, right? Is this a property that you want to be in the family for generations, or, do you think that there's a time element involved where you would be selling? And you need to think about this part of it for sure.
And then just the general, taxation, again, depending on whether it's a personal use, mixed use, or pure rental, that's going to have different implications. So, reviewing with the accountant any depreciation potential, ability to deduct expenses, it may or may not be something available depending on your usage of the property. So really making sure that you're, having those conversations before going into this.
And I'll just mention that it gets it maybe tricky is not the right word, but it gets complex, right? Because if you're renting it more than, you're renting it, this is a rental, you can depreciate the property, which just means that the cost of the home gets kind of like deducted every year by a certain amount. But what happens is, say it's your first year and you had some income, but with all your expenses, you have a loss, right? So you can't really necessarily, it gets very complex. We're not going to get in the nitty gritty on this now, but you won't be able to deduct that loss if you're not active in the business, which most of the time you're not. But what happens is that you cannot use it's called a disallowed loss. Like you can't use that loss, but it keeps you keep carrying it forward. So then if the losses that you weren't able to use because of those different specifications, you can, when you sold the property, if you do decide to sell the property, those would be added back to your cost basis. But these are, not to make it so complex, but these are the things that, especially on the rental side of things, that's why it's good, to have a good accountant that can help you navigate through these things. Because a lot of people also, they have accountants, but some other people just do it on their own. Like I would not feel so comfortable doing it on my own with the rental and so on. So, that's also something that if you were doing your own taxes, perhaps if you are going the rental route, consider also working with an accountant.
Definitely. And then just think about those folks that are working remotely, right? Does it have state tax implications as well is another consideration, where if you've been earning income in another state, you might then have to file taxes in that state.
You do.
Because essentially, right. So, again, another consideration that's kind of like you don't even think of until it happens. So trying to get ahead of that.
And, depending on where you live compared to where that property is, there's typically a preference for residents of that state from a tax perspective. So you could be, if you're a non-resident, you're paying property taxes, you could be paying more, for example, in Florida, if you're not a Florida resident and you're not eligible for that homestead rebate. If I live in New Jersey and I got a place down in Florida, I'd be typically paying more out of pocket for my property taxes than if I was a Florida resident. So just depending on what the state rules are, depending on where you think that property is going to be located, that's just something to think about in terms of what the numbers look like from your bottom line on a regular basis.
That's a great point.
And I know, Kate, I love the picture you got in the in the slide. I will say just to before we talk about the alternatives, I know we've had like it almost like we're saying like all the things that could happen and all like the things to consider. I would just say from a personal perspective, having the rental home or second home for us was really like, in the beginning we're like, oh my God, like you couldn't believe it. It was really like a good like feeling, and we still have it. We still love going, all those considerations that I mentioned have taken place, but we're mentioning them so that you just think about everything, like just get the whole picture. But this is not meant to discourage someone from considering that. We're just wanting to really make sure you look at it like very thoroughly before you do. But for us,
that's a great
getting
point.
that home was a great, like we love it. We love it. So
yeah, it's a milestone for a lot of folks.
Yeah,
right?
I'll add I was going to say, just personally speaking, I have siblings that have vacation homes, and from like an extended family point of view, it's because they have those second homes. It's in a beach area. They're generous enough to invite the family down for special occasions, and it's a place for us every year. We know typically we're going to get together with the extended family at a really, really neat location. And that's just added to memories. I could show you the pictures that we take of all the grandkids and whatnot, and the pictures that my sisters have on their walls and whatnot. We just have a ton of memories. And I think, Monica, to your point, that's if you think about why a lot of people are looking at second homes just from the qualitative standpoint, it's because they do want to have a place to get away, create family memories, and that matters.
That's priceless. Well, their memories are really
right. It's quantifiable.
Yeah, if you ignore the rest of the podcast before this, yes.
Yes. But I think like that's why we wanted to close with this slide, is because look, you could also consider other alternatives, and at the end of the day, you might end up still, no, you know what, I've tried this many things, I'm going this way, but it's also just worth considering. Am I not ready to pull the trigger? Well, why do I like this area? Let me rent a month Airbnb if you can, or let me go a couple weekends in a row, or let's just try to see what type of setting we like. I mean, do we really are we beach people? I think people kind of know that, but maybe we want to try a lake. I mean, how would that lake be? I mean, and I'll get the glass of wine that Kate was thinking about in the beginning of the podcast. I mean, can we do that? Can we just do some short-term rental somewhere else? Or let's just see that we really this is it. Or you might already know it, and then you don't have to do any of this. But for those that don't, you might want to just say let me rent around the area that I want to purchase. Let me see what restaurants are around. Let me see how I feel when I'm just not there for 4 hours or 2 hours, and that might also help kind of steer you one way or the other, in addition to everything else we've mentioned before.
Yeah, I always love to try it before you buy it.
Yeah,
phrase.
I mean, there's so much opportunity
so
to do
much
that now.
To it. Yeah,
absolutely. I did a little Google searching just to get some stats on some of this second home information, and so what I found in terms of what was interesting, the top 10, I won't go through all 10, but the top 10 areas in the U.S. that have the most second homes by percentage percentage of homes in that area. Any guesses in terms of where the top one is? Go ahead.
Florida.
Wrong.
I was gonna say Florida.
No.
How about this? So Florida doesn't show up until number 5 on the list.
Get out of here. Oh my
Number
gosh.
1, you would
certain.
probably never get this. I would never guess this either. It's basically like that upper peninsula Michigan area, kind of where it meets the border of Wisconsin. So there's an area up there called Marinette and Iron Mountain. It's on the border of Wisconsin and Michigan up there. Of course, lots of water up there, Great Lakes and whatnot. So that's the number 1. Almost 27% of the homes there are second.
Well, that's probably because they have really long winters and it's probably really hard to survive year round there. Like you've got to be really tough to live, in that band. So that makes sense. It has to be a second home.
Number 2. Basically, it's in the Maryland, Delaware Peninsula area. Salisbury, Cambridge, 25% of homes are second homes. I'll just do the top 5. Number 3 was the Edwards/Glenwood Springs, Colorado area. That's in the Rockies, right? West of Denver.
Skiing.
Absolutely. So that's 24% of homes are second homes. And now we're getting into ones that you would probably guess, something that I would have on my top 5. Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
Okay.
That comes in at 22%. And then the area of Florida that made the top 5 was I don't know if it's Cape Coral or Cape Coral, Monica, Naples and Fort Myers.
Yeah,
that
makes
that
sense.
area came in about 20%.
Wow. Those are good stats. I mean, it's interesting.
Great
I
stats.
never would have thought that Wisconsin was that one up there, but.
But the common theme there is basically either water or mountains, right? Whether it be a lake, a beach, ski area.
Very true.
There's hot springs up there in Glenwood Springs, apparently. I haven't.
So
been
a lot
there.
of seasonal use, a lot of like seasonal use second homes, right?
Absolutely. And in terms of, we're talking about getting some bang for your buck here too, right? So the places. So I looked at. Okay, give me the top places that have the best return on investment.
Now we're talking.
And what surprised me was 2 out of the top 3 were in Virginia. So the number 1 place to get a second home to get good ROI is a place called Lake Anna, Virginia. Have you guys heard of that area?
I have not.
No.
So I had
It's
a Google map.
unfortunate.
Yeah, it looks like a pretty big lake, and it's like in the middle of the triangle between DC, Richmond, and Charlottesville, Virginia.
Gotcha. So accessible.
So it's kind of nestled in between those big metro areas. And then number 3 was a place called Sandbridge, Virginia, which is on the beach. It's right on the Atlantic. That's south of Virginia Beach. And so so Virginia, if you haven't put that on your list of potential places to get a second home, maybe you should be thinking about it.
Very neat.
No.
Yeah.
And I know it's a bit of a hike for us. And a lot of times too, I think, second homes, it is kind of like a fantasy for a lot of folks, and understandably. And sometimes when you're feeling like, oh, I just need to get away, maybe you just need a vacation too, right? Like sometimes maybe you just need a vacation sometimes, and think about the second home and just kind of hitting reset. Because I think that's part of the fantasy for a lot of folks, right? Is kind of that reset button, kind of a refuge from, the day to day, and again, making those family memories. So, vacation sometimes, think about all the things you need to think about and try to quantify some of the items that, need to be considered.
Yeah, Monica, I think this is a great example of like how to blend together the qualitative and the quantitative for a big goal that somebody might have, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why we said talk to your trusted team of advisors, because one, you have to make it in the context of your overall plan. You can't buy a second home if you're there foregoing retirement savings or saving for college. Like you really have to look at it on the overall scheme of things. But yes, you have to do. I mean, there's going to be some qualitative things, like Kate said, like. You want to do this. This has always been your dream. Like there's things that are there. They're strong. And we're not saying don't. Just complement those considerations with the overall and the more quantitative, the numbers part, the cost part, the who's going to fix this if something breaks and so on. So yes, it is. It is an important decision. It is a big decision. That's why the more information you have, the better informed you will be to make that decision.
Well said. Absolutely.
Yeah, and this has been great. I get excited talking about this. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Kate, for having me today. It's always good talking about this. It's fun.
Well, thanks for sharing. Yeah, absolutely. You have good experience here, and it's certainly a popular topic with clients. So,
I would just say for those that are already in that stage, happy hunting.
Thank you so much, Monica. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to all of our listeners for joining. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.